Hello, listener. This is the third and final episode in our series on sexuality. We've focused on sexual shame and sexual pleasure, and today we'll consider sexual reconnection. Sex after betrayal is complicated territory. For some couples, the weeks after discovery bring a surge of sexual intensity that surprises them both. And for others, the bedroom becomes the last place either of them wants to go. And underneath it all, for a betrayed partner, lies a complicated question. How do I give myself to someone who already gave that away? My guest today is Xanet Pailet. She's a sex and intimacy coach, the author of The Sex and Intimacy Repair Kit, and the founder of Passionate Intimacy Retreats. But before any of that, she spent 26 years in a sexless marriage, carrying a kind of shame she didn't have the language for until she was 50. We talk about hysterical bonding and what's actually driving it. We talk about the wound of feeling compared and measured against someone else. And we talk about what it takes to rebuild sexual connection, which, as Xanet explains, almost never begins where couples assume it does. I'm Tim Tedder. This is episode 68 of the Affair Recovery Room.
Welcome to The Recovery Room, a podcast presented by affairhealing.com.
In this healing place. In this healing place.
Xanet, you're a sex and intimacy educator now, but you come from a completely different world. Healthcare law is what you came from. What happened that changed everything for you?
Well, I hated being a lawyer. That was one thing, which most lawyers hate anyway. And, I went through a really big transition when I hit age 50. I had been living in a sexless marriage for 26 years. And by the time both my children were in college, it was time to do something different in my personal life and apparently also in my career, which I didn't realize was going to happen. I was just like, there's got to be something more to life here. I'm 50 years old, I'm sort of in the midlife transition. There's got to be more to life here, both on the personal level and on the professional level. And that was part of the reason, that I just ended up shifting careers. And it wasn't an intentional shift. I didn't really think I was going to do this at all. But as I was going through my own work on my sexuality, because, we were in a sexless marriage for 26 years, most of which was because I felt broken because of trauma that I had as a child. I had a lot of work to do on me, on Xanet, on trying to figure this piece out because, I'd separated from my husband at the time and didn't wanted to be in relationship because I'm always I'm a very relationship, serial monogamist, I guess is what I've realized in my life. But I didn't know how to handle being able to tell somebody that, I couldn't have sex with them because it hurt. It was uncomfortable. I was traumatized around it. So I knew that I had to take a hard look at this issue for myself. And it was through that process that I ended up doing trainings. Who thought I would ever do trainings in the area of sexuality?
Well, you like many of my guests and like me, went through a period of self-discovery, of change, of learning, and out of that kind of shifted into a kind of focus of, well, how can I take what I've learned and help other people? So I want to get to that. But for people who haven't experienced it, 26 years in a sexless marriage, what was it like to live that day to day?
So it's interesting, right? Because I came into the marriage knowing that sex was challenging for me. My ex-husband knew that too, but we all thought it was going to get better. And it never did, and we couldn't really talk about it. And so for me, it was partially it was a relief because once it was decided, not that we ever had a conversation, we're going to stop having sex. But, over a couple of years, it became very clear after our children were born that we were going to stop having sex. And once that was kind of decided, it was both a relief for me. It's like, oh, thank God, I don't have to deal with this anymore. There's so much drama and pain around it. And there was also this huge yearning inside of me for touch, for connection, right? Which, I got from my children when they were younger, but it got very, very lonely as they got older. And my partner and I, like many people in sexless marriages, started sleeping in separate rooms. And there wasn't a lot of connection between us, physical connection, hardly at all. We never cuddled. We didn't hold hands. Like, it was just bad.
It's interesting. You talk about coming to that place and that decision in your marriage, but you never really talked about it.
Mm.
I think that's probably typical when it comes to sexual frustrations and dysfunctions and disconnections in marriages. It's surprising how little couples talk about something that's so integral as far as their relationship and connection.
Totally.
Your first book, Living the Orgasmic Life, it focused heavily on shame. So when you look at that experience of kind of coming to that place and not being able to talk about it, I mean, is shame wrapped up in that whole experience?
I mean, shame was definitely wrapped up in that whole experience, because the trauma that I experienced was not sexual abuse trauma, thankfully. Well, many, many people have. It was shame trauma from having being caught playing doctor with like my best friend in first grade, right? And horribly shamed for that, and never allowed to play with her again alone, which, just think about what that does to a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And then, having an experience with my pet dog who liked to lick my underwear, right? And there was already so much shame from the first thing that it created all of this anxiety for me around experiencing pleasure, because you know what? It felt good.
Yeah.
But the anxiety and the pleasure were coupled together, right? Which is what happens in a trauma response. And that just started a whole shame cascade, having shame around when I started having a period, which was its own disaster, and shame around my body and my breasts growing and being catcalled. And it was just like one shame episode after another, after another, after another, which I didn't realize until I did all of the work. And in the marriage, I felt really broken, right? Like, I knew this wasn't right, not to be able to have an orgasm, not to experience pleasure, for sex to be so painful and so dramatic. But I just felt so broken about it that it was hard to talk about. And we weren't good at talking, let's be honest. Like, when I do the autopsy, which I do talk about in my book on the relationship, it's pretty clear that we had no emotional connection. There wasn't a lot of emotional safety. We could not talk about this topic at all.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that emotional disconnection, but just to comment on what you said, it's interesting to me how often this shaming comes into the experience of children when the pleasure and curiosity about sex, which is completely normal,
Totally.
I mean, regardless of what a family's structured belief about, okay, how do we practice sexuality and how do you do that responsibly? How long should you wait and all that? Regardless of that, to not recognize that when a child's growing and experiencing those curiosities and experiencing pleasure, that's not something that you need to clamp down on and shame on you and don't do that. And I mean, it's such a damaging result in so many lives when it comes to having a healthy experience of sex. So,
and I think most of us have had that experience.
Yeah, I mean,
what I'm
it comes up
describing
so
is not
much.
unusual, right?
Yes. So let's talk about the relationship disconnection. You talked about relationship drift. Can you describe what that looks like to you? How do you recognize it in the couples you work with?
I think it becomes obvious that they're coming to see that they're in a relationship.
The really healthy, strong connection probably don't come to see
They
you for
probably
help.
don't come to see a sex and intimacy
I get
coach.
that.
But I would say that, relationship drift happens slowly over time. Generally speaking, right? It's not, sometimes there's like one event that actually creates a lot of disconnection. So an affair, betrayal, right, would be an example. But most of the time, it just happens slowly over time. And it's not intentional. It's life gets in the way, stress gets in the way. You end up focusing more on the logistics of life rather than, making the relationship a priority, right? Especially when you first meet and it's all about each other and our future and our dreams and our hopes. And then the kids come into play, in a younger relationship. And in a second marriage and third marriage, I see it happen as well, right? I think what happens is we stop making the relationship the priority in our life, right? And sometimes that has to happen because you have two little kids running around. They have to be your priority. But we take our partner for granted. We take the relationship for granted. We assume that we don't have to do any work. I think that's part of the way in which we've been socialized. It's like, oh, that's what happened to me. Oh, once you're married, it's going to be totally fine, right?
Yeah.
Which is total nonsense, right?
Yeah.
Because we do have to make the relationship priority, and relationships do take, I don't want to say work, but they do. They take you have to be very conscious around it and deal with things when they come up. And so people don't deal with things because they don't want to hurt each other, right? Like nobody wants to hurt their partner. So it's easier when you're a little bit upset or there's a conflict and you haven't been able to express your feelings just to push that under the rug. But over time, that creates more and more distance. And that's what relationship drift feels like.
And in your experience, is that something that's usually mutual, that both are kind of making the contributions to drift apart? Or is it sometimes one person that's bringing more of that than the other?
I think I've seen both situations. At some, they get into their pattern. And one person might be a little bit more, let's say, avoidant. And the other person is a little bit more like, anxious and keeps on moving forward when they're feeling drift, but they keep on feeling rejected. So at some point they're like, I don't want to be rejected anymore. So I'm going to drift away too, because that's going to feel safer for me. Right. I've seen it in both ways, but that's like one of the most common patterns that I've experienced with couples.
Well, whatever the cause of the sexual disconnection and relationship disconnection in a marriage or relationship, I want to get to your input on how a couple can find solution to that. But before we do that, I'd like your input on some of the aspects of infidelity and how that might really affect the experience of sexual connection or disconnection in a relationship. It's interesting, and I just talked to a client recently that was experiencing this. Sometimes after an affair is discovered, the couples might come back saying, hey, we are having the best sex we've ever had, or that we've had in a long time. The label for that is sometimes called hysterical bonding. It's a sudden, intense sexual reconnection between two people. What's actually happening there? And how should couples understand what's going on?
It's an interesting question. I think probably part of what's happening is the dopamine is surging again when there's been an affair, there's been a loss, there's been a lot of pain. It feels almost like the end of a relationship, which it is, right? In one way, that is the end of one chapter, if you will, of that relationship and the beginning of a new relationship. And I imagine that's what's happening is there's just a surge of dopamine, like it's new relationship energy again, because all of a sudden you're being desired or your partner is feeling like you're desiring them, right?
Yeah, that could be the fuel for it, I think, when two couples on the other side of discovery are both like, no, we want this relationship and let's make this work.
Right.
I often find that sometimes the betrayed partner in this fear of what am I losing here, and this disconnection, this longing to how do I reinforce the bonding? And all of a sudden something that wasn't really active in the relationship all of a sudden becomes a priority, and in ways that they're both kind of enjoying in the moment. I mean, couples sometimes wonder, is that healthy for us? And
does it last?
Yeah, well,
right?
Yeah, it probably it doesn't. It's not going to last with that intensity.
Yeah,
and I usually tell couples, listen, you're enjoying it. Just recognize it for what it is. This isn't the evidence that everything's fixed now and life's going to be wonderful. And this isn't going to last, but it is what it is for a while.
There's a probably competitive edge going on.
It could be that, sure.
Right? Like, because,
I'm claiming this back. And
the clients that I've seen who have the betrayal, the person betrayed, they feel not good enough, not desirable. They compare themselves to the person their partner was having an affair with, right? So I think there's a part of like, I'm going to prove to you that I'm worthy of your love, that I'm worthy of your attraction.
Yeah. Well, that kick up of sexual expression and activity doesn't always happen. I mean, in your
No.
experience, what do you typically see following infidelity, following an affair? What happens in the weeks or months afterwards in a relationship?
It really depends. From what I've experienced and what I've seen a variety of different pathways. For some, there is just months of pain and months of distaste for their partner and working inside of themselves. Is this someplace that I can stay? Is this salvageable for me? Is this pain too much, right? Can I continue down this road? That's one direction. And I think I see that of the couples that I've worked with, about 50% are like that, right? And it really takes them a long time to process and feel like maybe they could possibly start trusting their partner.
Yeah.
I have seen some percentage of couples where this is really a wake-up call. And these are generally couples that I feel have a lot more emotional resilience. And they see this as like, wow, we have really strayed. This is a wake-up call for us. We love each other. We're committed to each other, and we're going to figure out how to make this work. Those are obviously much easier couples to work with because they have had a lot more resilience. And then there's the couples that are like, this is too much. We're totally done.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sometimes that's a choice that's made. Do you see a difference in the way it affects the sexual relationship and I guess even the relationship as a whole when an affair is just pretty much a one-night stand or just purely physical, sexual, compared to those that have that emotional connection component to it? Is there a difference there that you see?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And again, it kind of depends on the couple, right? Like, I would say generally speaking, my experience is that like a one-night stand, I was at a convention and hooked up with this person at a bar. Generally, I feel like that's an easier affair to recover from. The affairs that are just emotional and or emotional and physical, that's a much harder affair to come back from because there is a huge sense of loss there, loss of that friendship, loss of that emotional relationship, really, really deep loss of trust. And what I've also seen, I'm curious if you've seen it as well, is even when the affair is discovered and the person having the affair has agreed to give up that other person, they're experiencing a ton of grief for the relationship that they're losing, which is incredibly hard for their partner to be able to even begin to process or have space for that.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's a very difficult thing because I think there are people that are genuinely choosing their marriage. And yet, if there is that emotional connection, you just don't clip it away and it's instantly gone. In most every case, there is a period of time where that has to be, unravel and diminish over time. And if you're the betrayed person, there's not much space, time, or energy that you want to give to the mourning of your partner over what they've lost. So that is a difficult thing.
Yeah, it is a very difficult thing. I think that's hard for some people to recover from.
So to come into the vulnerability of a sexual relationship after that kind of betrayal, when you know that your partner has given themselves, not just body, but heart too.
Yes.
Makes it very difficult to come into a vulnerable stance of, let's be intimate together. It's
right.
Now, I want to ask you something that I think some of the listeners probably wrestle with directly. The betrayed partner who feels that their body was replaced, or now they feel like they're being compared physically, sexually. The person who was supposed to desire only them desired somebody else and gave something and experienced something else. I mean, how does a person begin to heal from that specific wound? I mean, even when it comes to the physical intimacy.
Yeah, it's a really hard wound for a lot of people to heal from. It's a very, very deep wound. It goes to our core being, right? And often for a lot of people who already feel like they're not good enough, because that's a very core wound that people have, it makes it even, there's the proof I'm not good enough. They left me for somebody who's more beautiful, who's more sexual, who's more exciting.
Well, and especially if the partner was telling them that as justification, oh, they're so much better. I'm finally satisfied. Oh,
Right. Or if they've seen a picture,
yeah.
right. Or whatever. That's a really, really deep wound. And I think that partially that wound needs to be healed inside of yourself, right? There's like your own work around healing that wound that I'm not good enough, right? Like that's where it's coming from,
Yeah.
right? If we had a little more emotional resilience, maybe we feel a little bit more supported around that. And it sometimes takes a really long time to heal. Having an understanding partner where you're in a relationship where when things settle down a little bit, you can actually be able to have real vulnerable conversations with each other can be really helpful in terms of reassuring that person, I didn't have sex with this man or woman because you were a bad lover, right? There was another part for me.
Yeah, I know sometimes maybe this can't be honestly spoken, so you have to be careful, but because that is such, for men and women, it's such a feeling of inadequacy or, that comparison that's going on in their head, even if it's not going on in their partner's head anymore, it's going on in theirs.
Right.
For the one who broke trust, I encourage them, listen, those things that remain special, unique, and desirable in your marriage, you need to point those out. Like, here's the things that still belong only to us.
Yeah.
Here are the experiences we've had in the past that I still uphold as, in my memory as being very special. Here are some of the things that are uniquely our experiences, or the things that I especially enjoy or appreciate about you. I mean, don't make things up, don't lie about it, but many people have those unique things. You can't get into a discussion of, well, here's how you were better, here's where they were better. That's disaster. Right. But to at least let the partner know, like, no, there are a lot of areas where you still win. And by the way, let's work on creating new experiences that are uniquely ours together, from here on
I
out.
love that. And I think that's important. I think of a couple that I worked with where there was a playlist that they used to use all the time, right, when they were making love. And somehow she found out he used it with the other person, right?
Yeah.
And that made that whole playlist trauma for her. Anytime a song came on, it just totally put her in there, right? So we talked about, can you create something different? Can you go back and can you have your own list that's new, that's different, right? And I get it. There's memories associated with it that are no longer our memories, right? And I think, what happens in an affair, I've seen this, I'm sure you have too, is you start questioning everything. Is anything real?
Yeah.
And that makes it really hard as well for the person who was betrayed.
Sure. Well, realizing that probably most of the audience listening to this has been affected in one way or another by infidelity, but this issue that we're dealing with, this sexual disconnection that can happen in relationships, can happen for other reasons besides infidelity. So let's step back and take a broader view. And what do you think is one of the most common mistakes that couples make when they finally decide that they are going to fix things sexually?
I think the most common mistake that they make is that they think the way to fix it is to have more date nights, to use different positions, to get out the handcuffs. And like, that's what they think that the relationship needs. And they even call me and say, like, what's the different positions and all? And I'm like, okay, we can look at that. So I think that's the biggest problem, that what they don't understand is when there are sexual challenges in the relationship. This is not always true, but it's true most of the time. There are often underlying relationship issues that are not resolved, that they're not feeling emotionally safe with each other, that they're not feeling seen, and that one person maybe is very critical, that they're afraid if they open up and are vulnerable, that could be used against them, or sex is being used for manipulation, like, I'll give you sex if you make sure we go on vacation, right? There's a lot of manipulative tactics that happen for both genders around sex. And I think it's important to really understand what's going on. Other parts of that could also be there's been a lot of pressure to perform on both sides. And there hasn't been an understanding of being able to express what your needs are. And those needs change as we age and as our bodies change and we go through hormonal changes, both women and men. And so I think we have to really slow everything down and go underneath and see what's actually really happening here? And why are you feeling this sense of distance? Why are you feeling this disconnection? Why is it hard for your bodies to attune to each other?
Your new book is called The Sex and Intimacy Repair Kit.
It
What's
is.
the central insight, the one thing you most want couples to understand?
Well, I think it's what I just said, that the real foundation for a good sexual relationship is having a strong emotional connection and emotional safety. Like without that, you'll never be able to have a really fulfilling sex life that feels deeply passionate, deeply intimate, that can go through ups and downs, but still feel like you're on a journey together.
Yeah, it's interesting. What you're talking about, listen, sex just on a physical level can just be fun. I mean, it can feel good. But in a couple that's really wanting to find intimate connection with each other, sounds like what you're saying is that's what you have to give attention to. What's in the way of intimate connection? And as you're finding better connection and figuring out what's in the way of that, then a result of that is going to be more satisfying sex.
Right.
But so many times it seems like people are going, well, we're not connected, so we've got to figure out the sex part.
Right,
and that makes
right.
us connected. But you're
Right.
explaining, no, you're getting it backwards. It goes the other way.
Let me say that I think there is, generally speaking, gender differences around this, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So for many women need to feel more emotionally connected to their partner in order to feel like they can open up sexually, right? But for many men, it is through sexuality, it's through having sex with their partner that they feel that emotional connection.
Yeah.
And that they can be more vulnerable and intimate, right? So, it's like we're at opposite ends of the spectrum. and that is one of the things that makes this really challenging, which is why so many men will say to him, I just wanted more sex. And the women are like, no way, until I feel more emotionally connected with my partner.
The women saying, I don't want to have sex with you because I don't feel close to you. And the men are saying, well, I don't feel close to you because I'm not having sex with you.
Right, exactly.
And they're at an impasse there.
They're kind of at an impasse.
Yeah.
But, the answer to that is, and I'm sorry to say this, but I think it's true. The answer to that is you've got to focus on the emotional connection, because at some level, in most relationships, the women, they kind of hold the key, and she's got to feel emotionally safe in order for your needs to get met as well. So that's an important part.
It could be beneficial for men to understand that emotional connection is important to them too. I mean, I think we grew up a lot of times learning, I don't need that. We've usually got a lot of defenses up against that we need to take a look at. And
when people do feel that, right, when you see, a couple and they're starting to soften with each other, you can see both of their hearts open. You can see the melting happening inside of both of them. They both actually feel more seen and safer with each other. So yes, I'm not saying men don't need that. They need it. They just don't know they want it.
A lot of times that's true. Yeah. I think the term you've used before is the importance of the emotional safety in a relationship.
The emotional safety.
Yeah. So what does emotional safety actually mean in practice in a relationship?
The way I describe emotional safety is I think about the word intimacy, and I think about it phonetically, into-me-see. What does that mean? If I'm emotionally safe with my partner, if their emotional safety is there, then I feel like I can be totally honest with them. I can be very vulnerable with them. I can tell them something that might hurt them, but I know they're going to be okay with it. So I'm in a relationship where I can express my emotions, I can hear their emotions, and I don't have a fear that those emotions are going to be shamed, that they're going to become defensive, or maybe they're going to be a little defensive because people get defensive, but we know we're going to be able to get past that, right? So I think emotional safety means you really feel in a space where you can totally be you and totally be honest and be accepted by your partner, and they feel the same way about you.
Let's talk to that couple that's pretty good at trying to work through their relationship stuff. They've talked about things. They genuinely care for each other. They want their relationship to work. But this whole thing of sex has always been, maybe because of shame, they've never figured out how to work out. So neither of them is satisfied in that area. And they're ready.
Right.
I mean, they're pretty good together, but they don't know, how do we make this better?
Yep.
Where do you take them? What do you do?
I start by slowing everything down, because generally sex moves too fast. There's a lot of power in the quiet moments of connection with each other. So I like to really slow everything down. I like to get them to start to feel what an erotic connection looks like between each other. And that may be by helping them experience different ways of touching each other. It could be like I worked with a couple this morning, just like having them be in a melting hug for 5 minutes, right? Which nobody does, but allows both of your bodies, your nervous systems to find each other, to feel that safety, to slow down. And that's what they said to me, like, we've never done anything like this before. It really allowed us to slow down and feel our bodies. So that's a huge piece, because a lot of times we're not in our bodies, we're up in our heads. Like, we're worrying about what do we do next? Is my partner liking this? Like, what's next on my checklist to get him or her to where they want to be, as opposed to actually being in our body and experiencing the sensations of what it's like for two bodies to be touching.
Yeah, I mean, what you just described, I think a lot of times is like, okay, the success of this is orgasm. So
Right.
how do we get there? And am I getting my partner there? Am I going to get
Right.
there? And it's all that in
Right.
your head stuff. And so you're talking about slowing that down, paying attention to the connection, sensations in the moment.
Mhm.
It doesn't have,
Mhm.
sometimes maybe it's not even about the orgasm.
Right. Taking all those expectations. And a lot of times the reason they're struggling is because there's all these expectations and there's obligations. Like, she feels pressure to have an orgasm. He feels pressure to bring her to orgasm. He feels pressure to perform, but he's having erection issues, like all this stuff, right? And they just are missing the actual moment of connection and being in their bodies and noticing, what does it feel like when our bodies are touching, and what are the sensations, and how do I want to be touched? Not necessarily sexually, but there's lots of different ways to feel sensations, and starting to understand what feels good for me, and then having some words to explain to my partner what I want. For each of us to have some words, because most of the time we just expect our partner to know our bodies, and that usually is not that successful.
You know, one of the things I've loved about your story, Xanet, is that you spent so much of a sexless marriage and much of your life with shame wrapped around sexuality and everything. And then getting to the point 50 years old when you begin to think, maybe there's something more to this that I really want to figure out, that I want to enjoy. And I know there's a time in my life that, by the time I'm 50, who's going to even care about that stuff anymore? But that's the awakening or the beginning for your experience.
Yeah.
And now you're one of those people that I really appreciate is a safe place for other couples or individuals to come and say, listen, this is something I struggle with. And you almost become not only that resource, but I would imagine for some couples, when you give them an assignment, slow down, do this. It's almost like their permission to do something that they've not been comfortable to do before, and they're going to come back and process that with you. It can just take them to new places and new experiences. And I'm sure you get to be witness of how things begin to ignite and change in experiences.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be able to witness. My main philosophy in my work is that you can't talk your way into better sex and intimacy. You actually have to feel your way into it, right? Because sex happens in the body. Yes, our brain is obviously a big part of it. The act actually happens, in our body. And so being able to really feel, oh, yeah, this is what it feels like when I'm starting to feel aroused with my partner, which really requires you sometimes to slow down.
So someone listening to this, individual couple going, wow, we need something like this. Where do they go to find out more about you, your resources, your services, etc.?
You can definitely go to my website, which is passionateintimacyretreats.com. It's with an S, passionateintimacyretreats.com. So I do private couples retreats work in Asheville. Those are 4 to 5 day retreats. And then I also once a year lead a group retreat in Costa Rica. And then I do some couples coaching virtually as well.
I want to thank Xanet for sharing her story and insights. If you'd like to know more about her and the resources she provides, I've included a link to her website in the episode notes. Thank you for listening in.